If the idea of a shark sinking its teeth into you and eating you alive makes you nervous, imagine getting attacked by two at once. That's exactly what happened to the diver in today's episode, making it one of the scariest shark attack stories ever. This is the tragic man-eating shark attack in Cane Bay. What happened and why? Find out from the video. Welcome to Wild Assault. Bret Gillan, Rodney Temple, and Rodney McIlvaine were on a scientific expedition on October 14, 1972, to recover samples for a research project being conducted at Cane Bay on the island of St. Croix's North Shore. According to Gillan, the area has some of the best wall diving in the Eastern Caribbean. Even the drop-off was simple, requiring no lengthy boat ride. The team's mission was to collect photographs and check on traps set for a project. The only problem was that their destination was located on a 210-foot wall next to a steep drop-off. Rod was the dive leader and timekeeper. He documented the dives and tracked ascent times to ensure everyone's safety. Bret and Rodney did the majority of the heavy lifting. They all put on their gear and dove into the water, beginning their ill-fated journey down the Cane Bay wall. They arrived at their destination. Bret and Rodney got to work, while Rod looked around and scanned the surroundings. Rod had a terrifying glimpse of something. Off in the distance, there were two white-tip sharks. One was 12 feet long, while the other was slightly longer. The oceanic white-tip shark is a terrifying creature that lives primarily in tropical and warm temperate seas. It is distinguished by its long, white-tipped, rounded fins. According to recent research, the species is becoming less common due to a high demand for its massive fins, which are the main component of shark fin soup. It prefers gastropods, crabs, birds, stingrays, sea turtles, and thread fins to eat. However, this hunter will eat almost anything, including humans, despite the fact that slow-moving oceanic white-tip sharks are unquestionably dangerous to humans. They are best known for numerous attacks on survivors of shipwrecks and plane crashes at sea. They are also suspected of being responsible for a number of unreported human deaths. To give you an idea of how dangerous it is, the white-tip shark was a major species in what many people consider to be one of the worst mass shark attacks ever documented. I remember thinking how strange it was to see oceanic white-tips right here on the wall at Cane Bay, Bret later said. It was like walking off your back porch and seeing an African lion instead of an alley cat. Rodney was the first to go up and point out the sharks as they passed by. The crew was no stranger to these sharks, having had their fair share of dangerous encounters with white-tips while working offshore. The shark bit their equipment all the time. On occasion, the steel cables deployed from the research vessel, as well as the shafts and propellers, were targeted. These two sharks, on the other hand, appeared to be unique in some way, as they didn't seem to notice them. Rod remained behind as Bret turned around and began the ascent behind Rodney as their carefully planned dove dictated he would be the last to ascend. Bret and Rodney met at about 175 feet, just over the ledge, as they both rested on a coral while waiting for Rod. They became concerned when he began to arrive late. Rodney looked at Bret and pointed to his pressure gauge, which indicated that he was running low on air. Suddenly, Rod noticed a swarm of bubble exhaust coming from deeper water, indicating Rod's presence. Rod must have had some sort of air failure, the two reasoned, because Bret's air consumption was lower. He decided to send Rodney up while he went to see if Rod needed assistance. However, by the time Bret arrived at Rod, things had reached their apex. One of the sharks had unintentionally bitten him on the left thigh, and blood was gushing and red clouds were forming from the wound. Bret was stunned and couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Rod was desperately trying to get the 12-foot beast off his leg and sink deeper. Bret rushed to his friend's aid, grabbing his right shoulder harness strap and pulling hard. The second shark struck Rod in the same leg almost simultaneously and bit him viciously. In a desperate attempt to ward off his friend's attackers, Rod desperately gouged at the shark's eyes and gills. Bret punched the hungry beast's torso as they ripped large chunks of flesh from his friend's body. The two men continued their assault on the sharks, who appeared to squirm in pain before abruptly releasing the rod and retreating back down to deeper waters. Bret looked up, desperate to reach safety, and caught a glimpse of Robbie, who was about 100 feet above, watching in horror. The first shark returned in less than 15 seconds and struck the rod again, dragging both him and Bret over the drop-off. Rod had lost a significant amount of blood and tissue as a result of the attack, which had only lasted a minute at this point. As the second shark returned, Bret was clutching Rod's right heart, a strap. As the sharks continued to bite and tear Rod's helpless body, his efforts to swim back up were futile. The two men were being dragged deeper and deeper. Bret felt Rod move again to defend against another attack, and his hopes skyrocketed when he realized his friend was still alive. Bret clung to the edge of the drop-off wall for a brief moment, halting their rapid descent. Both sharks suddenly retreated, and Bret watched them circle their position about 10 feet away. Bret observed one of the sharks gulping the remains of Rod's lower left leg, while the other gulped a mouthful of flesh that had been bitten and torn off. Bret felt helpless as Rod was torn away from him. He watched in disbelief as Rod's lifeless body drifted into the abyss, surrounded by sharks. The attack had begun at about 200 feet. Bret's depth gauge read 325 feet, but he knew it had to be much deeper. Bret also nearly depleted his oxygen supply in a futile attempt to escape. Bret turned away from his mangled friend's body in what had to be his final goodbye before beginning his ascent to the surface. His oxygen-deprived brain was starting to fail, and the effects of hypoxia were becoming apparent. Bret would drift unconscious before reaching the surface, but miraculously awoke on the surface, gasping for air. The small amount of air in his safety vest was apparently enough to float him the rest of the way up and save his life. However, his survival was still a 1 in a million chance due to the unknown amount of emitted decompression. Nonetheless, Bret began swimming as fast as he could to shore, but by the time he arrived, his legs were numb. He was barely able to stand. In an incredible stroke of luck, a couple on their honeymoon discovered Bret's body as it drifted onto the beach. The wife turned out to be an air nurse who was familiar with the pathology of decompression sickness. Bret was released from the hospital 2 days later. He had miraculously survived ascending nearly 400 feet without any decompression sequence, but not without permanent side effects. He had residual numbness in both arms and legs, as well as significant hearing loss and legal blindness in his right eye, which he will have for the rest of his life. Rod's memorial service was held at the beach a week later, and his two friends attended. His body was never found,